So Shiv, we talked about Black Swan events, right? Nassim Taleb popularized this concept, and Black Swan events are basically things that are completely unpredictable that you'd never consider happening. And now we're going to go over how do you manage Black Swan events?
Okay. What do you mean by manage?
So how would you deal with, or how would you be able to, I guess, in a way, deal with when an unpredictable event does happen? Or how do you prepare for it, basically?
Oh, you just be a doomsday prepper. Start building, start building tunnels. Start hoarding all the food and all the stuff. But no, I'm just joking. I'm pretty sure there's 100% ways to deal with it. I think we spoke about it last week, but I think it's about you can't predict it, but you can sort of expect something to happen. Is sort of preparing for the expectation of something happening rather than predicting what's going to happen and trying to prepare for. Instead of preparing specifically for an event, you're preparing specifically for the consequences of events. Because I think we spoke about it, but the consequences of Black Swan events are quite consistent throughout. As in, some events have a lot more deaths. Some events have a lot more, human fatalities, human casualties. There's more destruction of buildings or infrastructure. But fundamentally, it's the core concept of what it's able to do to society is still the same across.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah, I would think you can't. There's no way of preventing Black Swan events.
Yeah, correct. Yeah,
that's why they're called Black Swan. They're just unpredictable events that you never see happening.
They just appear out of nowhere. It's that 1,001 day turkey problem. For 1,000 days, a turkey's leaving out. I think that's us. 1,000 days, we're all cool. Everything's fine. Everything's chill. Everything's quiet. Everything's going according to our plan and how we want things. And then day 1,001, beheaded. Not literally, but
it's by a small group of people
exactly
decide to start war. Then that's they start to play this game, and then that's when everyone else is affected. You can't predict that. But yeah, I completely agree. And even Nassim Taleb says that you can't predict every single event, and he says the best thing to do is just prepare. And we're actually much better off preparing for a wide range of contingencies that rather than just predicting every little small event that might happen. And to be honest, most of the prediction is hindsight bias. It's we sort of say it after oh yeah, I saw that coming. Okay, what did you do to prepare for that, And that's the thing. It's a lot of it is hindsight bias. Oh, it's so obvious. We should have known this, that.
Yeah.
But
I think there's a saying that even putting on color tinted glasses, the red flags look colored or something. So I think it's the red flags are in front of us, right? But we just choose to ignore it. We're just oh yeah, it'll go away, and we just choose to be ignorant towards it. It's kind of understandable. I think we try to avoid. Again, it goes back down to that conspiracy rabbit hole. You don't want to start thinking about an event and thinking what are the consequences of that event, and then what's going to happen, and then it becomes a complete circus in your own mind, right? Because then you've created this you're in an anxious mindset, and you're just worried about something that hasn't even happened yet. But yeah, hindsight bias is funny, and I think it's I think I said this last time, but Jordan Peterson speaks about it so well. People during World War II were so easy to give up their Jewish neighbors, without a doubt, without any care of what happens, And then in hindsight, it's I would never give up people. But, COVID was a good example of the herd mentality. COVID was a good indicator that people, once they're herd and they follow a certain narrative, that anyone that doesn't follow that narrative becomes ostracized, right? And that's quite true. If you're not think about 2022. You're not vaccinated. Oh my God, stay away. And I think, all the draconian rules that were brought in to really push. And this isn't a conspiracy against vaccinations itself. I'm just simply saying people that were skeptical or people that didn't want to get the vaccinations or they weren't wearing masks or socially distance. I think for safety reasons at that time, yes, you have to follow that, but to what extent do other people have to police that? You're not the police. You're not the Gestapo. But people were close, really trying to be the pro-government, very in line with authority and have that authoritarian figure, And then now, I think in whatever the next event happens, people will still do the same thing.
Yeah, it's just human nature, I suppose. Just
Herd
part
mentality.
Of it. Yeah. Herd
I mean,
mentality.
it's how we survived, right? In groups,
Yeah,
you know. So
definitely.
if someone's away, like if someone doesn't think like a group or a certain group, they're seen as an outsider. I mean, you see it now. Like if there's 10 people talk about NRL and then one person isn't as involved in NRL, you don't have a bias towards them, but they're just they don't feel included or a part of it. I think people forget about that a lot as well. Is that some people actually aren't into what you're into or the way you think. I mean, I struggle with it. Sometimes I carry on about things that people don't care about, and it's like, oh, maybe I could have approached it a bit different to make that person feel included.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think a good example I can think about for hindsight bias is like crypto. Everyone says, if only I was in Bitcoin 5-10 years ago, then I would have been a millionaire. So this is like the easiest example of hindsight bias. And it happens a lot in investing. It happens a lot in just like when it comes to money. It's like, oh, if only I did this. But it's like should, would, could. These are 3 words you hear a lot of hindsight bias. So yeah, definitely. And as I said, like we can't predict even natural disasters. You can't predict like an earthquake or like a flood or any of these things that can happen. Maybe you can with some. Maybe you can predict, but you can't. You don't know the specific date of when it will happen. So
yeah, there's like a sort of a build up to it.
Build up towards it, but even still, like in Japan, like a lot of the tsunamis and stuff that happen, like yeah, of course, there's going to be. It's in the tectonic plate. There's a probability of that happening, but you don't know how. You don't know when it will exactly happen. But as you said, you can prepare for the consequences of it happening in advance. So so it comes back to that point. Just prepare, don't just predict. And then the other point as well he brings up is like, don't focus on the small predictions, because if we spend our time just focusing on the little tiny events that happen, it's like Final Destination. I don't know if you watched that movie I mentioned before. Like most ridiculous things, like some cap falls on the road and some guy sees a cap, flips the car, has an accident. Someone else's house is now broken, now it's on fire, exploding. It's like most ridiculous things that you don't think about just happens. But if we spend our time focusing on those small little predictions, as you said, like we'll fall into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. So what he says instead is apply probabilistic thinking. And I'm going to go more of this a bit later, but basically probabilistic thinking is just being able to look at things with a more of a logical mindset of how likely it is to happen, this event. And that's the type of frame to use. And the thing is, what you realize is we have a tendency to use a lot of heuristics in decision making. And what heuristics means is like mental shortcuts that simplify a very complex decision. And one of the best examples is like availability heuristic, where we judge the likelihood of events based on how easily information and examples are to our minds, available to our minds. So for example, when we see airplane crashes, now imagine you see this everywhere. You go on your social media feed, you talk to your friends, they're talking about it. You go on your Google News and you see it on there. You hear it on the radio, probably no one listens to radio, but say Spotify, you hear people talking about it. So it's like, it's everywhere. Now you're thinking airplane crashes are so common that you're making in your mind, oh, it's like a 60-70% chance of airplane crashes, which that means like every 7 in 10 planes are going to crash, which is, and if you look at statistics, right, airplane crashes are actually a lot less likely to occur and a lot, statistically speaking, safer than car crashes. But because of news and information available to us, we make those conclusions. And that's where you can see a lot of error happens in that process. So that's why it's like when you apply probabilistic thinking, you look at it from an objective perspective of what actually is the statistics saying. How likely are airplane crashes? I don't really know, but I'm just saying like probably it's 1 in 10 or something, or much lower than that.
A lot lower.
A lot lower, yeah. I'm just saying.
1 in 10, holy shit, that'd be so high.
I'm saying it's a lot lower, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just exaggerating those, but I'm saying it's a lot lower than, for example, car crashes. Because how many cars are there on the road versus how many planes are there in the sky? So you just think about it in that frame, obviously it's going to be a lot less speaking. And there's a lot of engineering like checks and validation inspections that they do before they launch a plane out there, which gets checked by a lot of other different types of people. So, but I'm just saying like availability heuristic, there's these types of shortcuts our mind makes to make decision making very easy. It's not that it's always bad. It can also be very good. But you can be very mindful of these things when you're, especially trying to predict events and predict things. Yeah.
Going back to the airplane crashes, I think a large chunk of those airplane crashes actually either happen a few minutes after takeoff or during landing. So a lot of these crashes actually occur during critical moments such as landing or takeoff. So which even adds more to that, right? A bit, because it's like the likelihood of the plane falling out of the sky at 40,000 feet whilst it's cruising is very, very low. But the likelihood of something happening whilst you're landing or taking off is a bit higher based on statistics. Just thought I'd add that.
No, that's interesting.
I think, do you think though, sometimes being too logical in that sense, you start to lose focus of what are the, I'm trying to word this the best way. You start to lose focus of the consequences in a way. So like, even if statistically sometimes things are very unlikely to happen, but they still happen. And so, but this was, availability heuristics. Yeah. So it's availability of information at that point.
Yeah, information that's easily available to you that you make conclusions of.
Okay.
And now a much better example I can think of is like if you look at the whole, maybe I shouldn't mention, but basically like on a newsfeed, you just see like podcasts and you see women and OnlyFans girls,
right?
Like mainly in these types of videos that you watch. And then you start to make conclusions that this is the representative of all women when it might be just 0.1% of the women population.
Right.
Because you see this everywhere on your Twitter, on your YouTube, you start to make conclusions that this is how women are.
Yeah.
When it's not the case.
Even the base how you view the world. Like everyone thinks the world is, like maybe I think it's huge in America. It's like conservative versus liberal politics. If you start consuming too much anti-conservative, you think everything conservative is bad, or everything anti-liberal, or everything liberal is bad. But it's just it's just the information that you're literally feeding yourself, and you're giving yourself that bias without actually understanding what's happening.
Exactly, or like looking at it from a different frame of perspective and just getting information from both ends and then being more objective rather than being very subjective. And the more subjective you are, the algorithm just pushes that.
Yeah.
So
they love controversy.
Yeah, and but like that too, it's like they're trying to tailor information that you would like because at the end of the day, it generates more money through ad revenue and things. So,
money. Yeah.
Then there's also another heuristic which is called anchoring, and this happens a lot in negotiation. So it's actually the person that puts the price first has the most amount of, I'll say, leverage. Because say, for example, you and I right now, say you wanted to do like a web service, you're going to offer me like, and say you like, yeah, look, what's if I want to do like a website for you? It's going to be like around $3,000. My mind automatically is now thinking, how can I come close to this, but drop the price a bit lower? Whereas if I said, I would like a web service from you for $500, now you're going to try and anchor towards that price. So it's called anchoring. Like that first, whoever puts like the first, I would say, piece of information has the most amount of leverage. Mm-hmm. And you see that a lot in like when you go to auctions and all these types of things, especially money, it really does put a lot of that bias. And it's sort of funny. It's like when you go to auctions, right? You think, oh, this house can be $1 million. I'll probably go $50,000 over. Yeah, no, that's not happening. It's going to probably go $300,000, $400,000 over without you even realizing because of anchoring. Someone puts out the first price, 1.2 million. Now you're thinking, how do I match this price? Or how do I increase this so I can, get the house? So now it's way over your budget. Now you've gone like $350,000 way over your budget. So this is anchoring. So these are like shortcuts that are being made without you even noticing. Until you buy it, then you realize, wow, I just went over $300,000 over my budget.
How does that relate to Black Swan events and managing them?
Well, I mean, it's more about being aware about it, because these are things that are happening in your mind when you like. I guess one of the things is like when you're making predictions, you find information that's the most available to you and usually like when we research things, right? We just go off the first piece of information that we digest. So whenever I research something about natural disasters happening, let's just say cancer cells, like I think I have cancer or something, I'll literally go off the first website and say like, okay, that's my conclusion. I actually have it, or I might have potential for it. So you make something very, very ridiculous claims without even going in further.
And you anchor towards to
that. You start to think, and now you have like confirmation bias. What is information that backs this up?
Yeah.
And then you have information that's available to you, like people telling you things, and now you just think that's actually true. When no, you should actually go to someone who's professional at this, and then check if like this is the truth or whether or not. Like,
that's why the news headlines are so important, and that's why the news try to get the story out first. Like that's probably the media tries to be the first person that's right there.
Well, yeah, that is the case, right? Because a lot of people's like podcasts, YouTube videos then come after the news. So yeah, that's true. But I guess like coming back to the Black Swan, it helps when you're more aware about these things. It helps creating. It makes you create less errors, and I guess in a way it prevents you from creating your own Black Swan. In some ways. Because you having those types of conclusions, which are completely wrong, can create outcomes that you never really would have. I mean, you would never would have predicted, or could go chaotic. Like imagine I was living with the fact that I thought that I had cancer when I actually don't even have any of that.
You'd probably manifest that and cause yourself cancer.
Yeah, and exactly, right? Yeah. So you end up manifesting into a Black Swan event in a way. So it's just being very careful of information. I think other than like all these threats, like we think about natural disasters and like pandemics and all these things, misinformation is one of the biggest ones in this day and age, especially.
Yeah, it's huge. It's where it goes back to the controversy and creating chaos in a way at times.
Yeah, making your life more chaos than shit. Yeah,
chaotic, and I think it's a way to manipulate the masses, and they've found a way to do it really well. I think the pandemic was a good example of it, in a way.
Yeah, I think so too. But I think like even people just unconsciously do it as well. Like some people just give out information for the sake of getting clicks and views, but they don't really actually understand what they're giving out and how people are going to actually interpret this.
Yeah.
And it's just...
It's what's going to make them the most money at that point. That's all it is.
Potentially, yeah. Pretty much. And then I guess like once you have these decisions and you identify risks, then he says like categorize them, like in terms of severity, probability, impact, and also like urgency. And I guess like this is done a lot in like companies when they try and look at risk mitigation and things like what can go wrong. So
they have a full contingency plan and everything ready. Yeah.
Yeah, they're prepared
BCP
for Black
plans,
Swans.
business continuity plans, etc. Every business has it.
Yeah.
In the event of any disasters or any events, It's quite interesting, actually, the fact that they have those plans and it's something that's there. It shows a good level of preparation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they would have to because they have hundreds and thousands of employees. So if something goes wrong, it's not just wrong for the CEO, but it impacts the entire, like hundreds and thousands of people, but they have families. So it impacts a lot of...
And customers and money and a lot of
basically
stuff.
Basically the nation, you could think of it, if they contribute to the
exactly.
GDP. So
that's
why they have to have these contingencies. But we can still apply this in our own lives as well. Of what would, if this happens, how would I deal with this? Or how am I going to prepare for when this does happen?
What's the next probabilistic thinking?
This isn't really probabilistic thinking. This is like more of like Nassim Taleb's type of advice. I'm going to go over probabilistic thinking a bit, eventually get there.
What's the next part of his management process?
So one of the things as well is realizing that, I know we've talked about Black Swan events in like a negative light in some ways. We did talk about some positives. And I think what he's trying to say is like maximize possibilities of optimistic Black Swan, which is like, yeah, sure, they can be negative and disruptive because it's completely unpredictable. But it can also be positive in the long term. In the sense, what I mean by that is when a Black Swan event does happen, it forces you to seek companionship, finding people that you can trust, people that will be your ally in that circumstance. And it makes you more proactive for seeking more opportunities. It forces you to change and transform your way of thinking. And if you think about World War II, right? Remember how I talked about Alan Turing, the guy who's the father of computer science? Well, him and some mathematicians gathered together to be able to crack the enigma code. And that actually ended up saving 14 million people and reduce the war by two years, which is actually significant when you think about the amount of damage a war creates. So with the ally of, I guess, intelligence, with mathematicians and Alan Turing, they're able to save more 40 million people's lives. So that Black Swan event allowed them to connect. And I guess maybe from there, he got more and more interesting ideas by finding how to crack codes. Then after that, basically, ever since then, it was like a huge development in technology. We saw computers, then we saw the Nokia phones, which are unbreakable to this day, and we saw like smartphones, like a complete revolution in technology. And I would say he was the father of computer science, so I guess software and AI. If you go to any scholar or anyone, they'll always refer to him as like the person who really popularized AI and computer to what we know to this day. So that Black Swan event, obviously, it was horrible for people that have gone through those wars and things like that. But another positive perspective was we had a lot of growth. It forces us to ally together and come together and innovate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. I think it also brought in technological advancements, but it also geopolitical relations, globalization sort of came into place at this point as well. So I think previously it was the trading between companies and between allies was very restricted between certain countries, but I think it showed that best way moving forward was through allied and through better relationships. I mean, the Cold War between Russia and US wasn't ideal. That wasn't probably what they were looking for, but I also think with overall Europe and how the world actually changed in terms of I mean, since then we haven't had a world war. I think there's certain controls and things set in place to ensure that something to that scale doesn't happen again. In saying that, we don't know, right? Like anyone can predict anything at any point and try to say, oh, we won't go through another world war. But I think right now, at this very point, there are a few red flags, which we'll talk about later, that really could indicate potentially a war. Who knows, right? But yeah, I think like nuclear fusion also was a big part that came out of it. Opened a can of worms where it's, nuclear warfare is a very serious, it's a very serious damaging discovery in a way. But yeah, you're right. I think the technological advancements we've had has been quite significant since World War II. It was sort of the turning point, I think, in revolution. Like we had Industrial Revolution, and I think it changed people's mindset a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it really did put us into like the information age, which we're in.
I think COVID did the same as well. I know it made people think a bit more. I think, the inflation and cost of living, all that stuff has skyrocketed. I mean, I'll take that back. I don't see any positives that have come out from it yet, from COVID. I think it's made people a bit more aware.
I would say the positives you could look at it is that it's digitized a lot of things. In the sense, like it made, there's positive negatives, but it's allowed for more flexibility at workplaces, right?
Yeah, that's a big win for corporate.
Yeah.
But it's a big loss for landlords, the people that own these commercial buildings, because rent, and then businesses surrounding these buildings, just people aren't in the office enough, therefore there's not enough demand for their small businesses, right? These small cafes, restaurants and stuff rely on office workers, and people are choosing to work more remotely.
Yeah, there's always disadvantages, but
Exactly.
I guess then that forces them to become more digitized in the process. Like, how do you use tech and how do you leverage off that? But yeah, there's always going to be pros and cons to it. But I guess like you just want to maximize positives as much as you can, and you want to minimize the damage from the negatives that occur. Like, I think that's what he's trying to emphasize more on. Because as you said, you can't prevent it from happening, because there's a whole bunch of decisions that are being made in that complex situation, but you can at least capitalize on the positive outcomes as much as possible.
What's the next management tactic?
So this is basically a strategy he has come up with. So have you heard about the barbell strategy before?
No, never.
So basically it's to minimize the pain of negative Black Swan events while reaping a positive of Black Swan events. And the best example is like what Taleb was like a trader. Like he would do stock trading, all that stuff a lot.
Oh, I thought you said he was a traitor.
No, it's not a trader. Maybe,
I'm checking out a Yahoo
maybe
trader,
sometime
actually.
in his life he was, but I'm joking. I don't
still
know. I have
alive?
no clue. Yeah, he is. Yeah.
He's still alive. Interesting. Be a good chat.
Yeah, so he was a trader, and like what he would do is he would allocate 85% of his portfolio to safe assets, maybe gold or like safe assets, like things that are not going to be as volatile and things. And he would allocate 15% of his portfolio to like highly risky ones, like probably penny stocks or whatever it is. And even if the market dropped, he had 85% of his investment, which he could just start to either he would short the market, which is basically speculating that the market's going to drop and profiting off that, or either he would just use it to invest in like dollar cost average down. So like he applied this barbell strategy to basically like in investment. It made it more safe and firm. But I guess you can apply this in a lot of your life. Like I call it, I use 80-20 rule, which is Pareto, the Pareto principle. I use that a lot. So 80% of it, I'm going to put it in like something that's more safe or go for more of like a safe decision. And 20% I'll probably allow for a bit of risk. Then that way, if say a failure does occur, then it doesn't matter. It's all right. I'll still survive. I've got 80% left. So that's what barbell strategy is.
So it's just
Putting more weight towards the safe option and just leaving a little bit of room for risk.
trying to think of how that would apply to a life.
Well, maybe you can think about it in terms of time. Say that you're trying to experiment with something that is like a new idea you're trying to explore, a new skill you're trying to learn. Maybe you could use 20% of your time to allocate towards learning that and see if it's actually for you. And 80% of your time is dedicated towards the other stuff, like your career and everything else. Because you want to learn it, but you don't also risk going all in because you need money and you need other things, your values. So you can distribute your time that way. And you can even say like, oh, it's something you don't like. At least you didn't waste your entire like several months doing that. And it's like after you spend like a few weeks or months, then you can assess and be like, is this something that I really want to learn? Do I enjoy this? And is this something that I see useful and aligns with my values? If so, then I'll just split it, go more into this skill. So I guess you can look at it in terms of distribution of time with new things.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Smart dude, seems like it.
yeah, very, very amazing guy. I would say definitely read his book about Black Swan. And I think he's got another book called Anti-Fragility, which we'll talk more about.
Nice.
But amazing books. Definitely worth a read. Even watching this guy is amazing. The way he talks.
Be a good chat.
Yeah. Honestly, we love him here. If you're down, feel free to reach out.
No, we'll reach out.
No, we'll reach out. Yeah. But honestly, would love